The Miami Hurricanes just beat the Florida State Seminoles for this blue chip defensive back recruit. He's staying in South Florida. Bryce Fitzgerald, welcome to the U.
You are Locked On Canes, your daily podcast on the Miami Hurricanes, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Well, the loafers are on, and Mario Cristobal is suddenly keeping me very busy. We go in rapid succession from Micah Newton to Bryce Fitzgerald. I am Alex Donno, University of Miami alumnus, longtime South Florida sports radio vet, writer for allhurricanes.com. And thank you so much to the everydayers for making Locked On Canes your first listen and your first watch today. We're available free wherever you get your podcasts. We're free on YouTube. We're part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. We're going to talk about what might be next for Miami, where Miami now stands in the recruiting rankings after landing a blue chip defensive back, and of course, the all-important scouting reports. And we're going to join here in a second by the recruiting overlord. And every time Brian Smith joins us, he's brought to you by LinkedIn. These days, every new potential hire can feel like a high-stakes wager for your small business. That's why LinkedIn Jobs helps you find the right people for your team faster and for free. Post your job for free at linkedin.com/Locked On College. Terms and conditions apply. The Overlord is now with us. Brian Smith, recruiting expert here on Locked On. So Miami has just landed four-star safety Bryce Fitzgerald out of Miami Columbus High School. Now, Brian, let's talk about the recruiting battle, because I mentioned at the top, Miami beating the Florida State Seminoles for this one. And as of just a couple days ago, it looked like Fitzgerald was going to be a Seminole. And then the narrative changed very quickly. Can you talk about that on the Florida State side as well? What happened there?
I've been trying to figure this out. I made multiple calls. I've spoken to different people that cover different teams. I've not gotten one pure answer yet. So part of it is it's just South Florida recruiting. That much I'm assured of, because there's always questions with it. But he's a Columbus kid. Obviously, Mario went to school there, and so did Alex Mirabal as well. It's right down the road. Heck, you don't even live that, or used to not even live that far from there, and it's close to campus.
Yeah.
I wonder if part of it was, you know what, I think I'll just stay here. It's close enough that Miami's just convenient, because everything I'd heard and everybody was predicting was the Noles. And then all of a sudden, like Wednesday comes around, start hearing a little bit. By Friday, everybody said he's going to Miami. I don't know what it is, man. It's wild.
Well, let's talk about the player himself, and I'm certainly glad he's going to be a Miami Hurricane. He just offered his verbal pledge. This is our immediate reaction to Bryce Fitzgerald choosing the Miami Hurricanes. He's the 18th rated safety in the entire class of 2025. He's a four-star prospect, 28th ranked player in the state of Florida. That's actually the regular 24/7 sports rankings. If you go by the 24/7 composite, which averages out all the recruiting services, he actually ranks a little bit higher. 12th overall safety in the class, 21st ranked player in the state of Florida. So this is a bona fide blue chipper, Brian, and he's got some versatility in the defensive backfield. Our understanding is he wants to be a safety at Miami. Tell us a little bit about Bryce Fitzgerald and how he could fit a Lance Guidry defense.
Well, I think versatility is the first thing to talk about. He had 10 picks last year for Columbus, but they played a lot of basic cover two because they had such a good front. They could play pretty soft. And the quarterbacks that threw it up often regretted it. He returned a few for touchdowns as well. But his ability to backpedal, change direction, his natural arm length, and just his aggressive nature, you could play him at corner and man defense as well. I think they'll use him in different spots, and he might even be a guy that plays nickel, that incredibly difficult spot. I think he is a three-pronged guy, nickel, corner, or safety. If they just use him at one spot, by all means, that's their decision. Yeah. I think that'd be a mistake, because he should at least be cross-trained, which about every school does anyway. Because there's, a team that you go up against might have a big receiver in the slot or smaller. You may match him up differently. He's a really unique football player.
So, and this was a mover when it comes to Miami in the recruiting rankings. This becomes the 22nd verbal commit for Miami in the class of 2025. They had just landed Micah Newton on the defensive line, who we'll talk about here in a couple moments with Brian. But adding Bryce Fitzgerald actually moves Miami on the 24/7 sports recruiting rankings from the number 10 class in the country up to number 8 now. So this was definitely a mover for the Hurricanes. And I know, Brian, Miami had a couple of L's this week. I'm not going to sugarcoat it. They couldn't swing a couple of legacies away from the schools of their families. Miami lost out on 5-star defensive lineman Jose Epinesa, who chose Iowa, and they lost out on Ben Hanks Jr., who went to Florida. So does landing a guy like Fitzgerald soften that blow at least a little bit?
Yeah, I mean, he's a good player, and he's in your backyard. Miami, as you and I talked off air, they need to improve in the secondary. Even though they had a couple guys going on to the NFL draft this past year, they ended up being, depending on which service you go by, 107th by CFB stats and pass breakups last year. With only 33 of them. I was surprised by that stat, especially with Miami's pass rush. But they need more guys that can just get their hands on the football, period. This is a guy that can do it. That's really the last hurdle, in my opinion, on Miami's roster is the secondary to get up to elite level. They're starting to get there. Last year, if you remember, it's funny, Zaquan Patterson was also leaning to Florida State and then ended up in Miami, a South Florida guy that I think will play quite a bit this year. They're trending in the right direction there too. So, yeah, getting a very good football player.
And this defensive back class, Brian, it's stacked already. I mean, Hylton, Drake, Stubbs at safety, who recently earned his 5th star at Rivals. You know, Miami won. The battle's not completely over, obviously, till signing day, but Miami got the big verbal commitment from Jaboree Antoine, snatching him away from LSU. You've got, I know he just suffered an unfortunate injury, but hopefully he'll be okay by the time he gets to Miami. Amari Wallace, who's another 4-star defensive back, Chris Ewald, who's a 4-star cornerback, Timothy Merritt, a high-ranked 3-star cornerback, and you add Bryce Fitzgerald to this group, assuming they can keep this class of DBs together, Brian, it's going to end up being one of the best Miami defensive backfield classes in a long time.
That might be the difference. If you get over the top, I mean, think about the playoffs. Once you get in, everybody can score in that group. Like the Ohio State-Georgia game a couple of years ago was in the 40s. Those are teams with a lot of defense. So you just need as many DBs as you can. Yeah, whoever ends up panning out, it kind of takes care of itself. But if you look at each guy individually, the length and the athleticism that Cristobal and his staff are putting together here is really, really good. So might even be top 2 or 3 in the country. So I think Miami's trending in the right direction.
Now, you know, Miami, I mentioned, just landed another verbal commit last night. They let us rest for about 2 weeks, and now they're starting to snatch players off the board left and right. Actually flipped one yesterday, Brian. Micah Newton, defensive lineman who was committed to NC State. I still haven't confirmed that Kenton Gibbs and I are still friends. I don't know if he's bitter about this or not, but Miami flipped Micah Newton from NC State. Have you had a chance to watch that player at Newberry, Florida?
Yeah, he's a kid that's a really good player. That's an edge that could play 3 technique at some point. He's in the 250-pound range. Pretty twitchy kid, really gets after it, kind of fits NC State's defense. I respect their staff with how they evaluate. Miami comes in late, gets a kid to flip, and he lives about 30 minutes from Gainesville. So to go see Miami's first game, he won't have to go very far.
There you go. Well, I love it. Miami adding anything else you want to tell the folks about Bryce Fitzgerald, the newest Miami Hurricanes commit, 4-star safety class of 2025?
One of the smartest players in the class of 25, regardless of position. He's always in the right spot. I've discussed this with numerous guys in the recruiting industry. It's just a matter of kind of where you put him. He could play receiver too. He's good at that. It won't matter though. He's a football player that figures it out. That's a really good sign for his future.
Welcome to the U, Mr. Fitzgerald. Huge shout out and thank you to Brian Smith. Brian is my colleague, by the way, at Athlon Sports. We write about the Hurricanes there, so make sure you check it out. And of course, he's our awesome colleague here on the Locked On Podcast Network. So a couple of rapid fire commits within the last 24 hours, guys. Let's keep it rolling. We'll talk to you again next time on another episode of Locked On Canes, part of the awesome Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.